Little Red Cap, more commonly known as Little Red Riding Hood, by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, there was a dear little girl who was loved by everyone who looked at her, but most of all, by her grandmother, and there was nothing that she would not have given to the child. Once, she gave her a little cap of red velvet, which suited her so well that she would never wear anything else, so she was always called Little Red Cap. One day, her mother said to her,
"Come, Little Red Cap, here's a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. She is ill and weak, and they will do her good. Set out before it gets too hot, and when you are going, walk nicely and quietly, and do not run off the path, or you will fall and break the bottle, and then your grandmother will get nothing. And when you go into her room, don't forget to say, 'Good morning,' and don't peep into every corner before you do it."
"I will take great care,"
said Little Red Cap to her mother, and gave her hand on it. The grandmother lived out in the wood, half a league from the village, and just as Little Red Cap entered the wood, a wolf met her. Red Cap did not know what a wicked creature he was, and was not at all afraid of him.
"Good day, Little Red Cap,"
said he.
"Thank you kindly, wolf."
"Whither away so early, Little Red Cap?"
"To my grandmother's."
"What have you got in your apron?"
"Cake and wine. Yesterday was baking day, so poor sick grandmother is to have something good to make her stronger."
"Where does your grandmother live, Little Red Cap?"
"A good quarter of a league farther on in the wood. Her house stands under the 3 large oak trees. The nut trees are just below. You surely must know it,"
replied Little Red Cap. The wolf thought to himself,
"What a tender young creature. What a nice plump mouthful. She will be better to eat than the old woman. I must act craftily so as to catch both."
So he walked for a short time by the side of Little Red Cap, and then he said,
"See, Little Red Cap, how pretty the flowers are about here. Why do you not look round? I believe, too, that you do not hear how sweetly the little birds are singing. You walk gravely along as if you are going to school, while everything else out here in the wood is merry."
Little Red Cap raised her eyes, and when she saw the sunbeams dancing here and there through the trees and pretty flowers growing everywhere, she thought,
"Suppose I take grandmother a fresh nosegay? That will please her too. It is so early in the day that I shall still get there in good time."
and so she ran from the path into the wood to look for flowers, and whenever she had picked one, she fancied that she saw a still prettier one farther on, and ran after it, and so got deeper and deeper into the wood. Meanwhile, the wolf ran straight to the grandmother's house and knocked at the door.
"Who is there?"
"Little Red Cap.
Replied the wolf.
She is bringing cake and wine. Open the door."
"Lift the latch.
Called out the grandmother.
I am too weak and cannot get up."
The wolf lifted the latch. The door sprang open, and without saying a word, he went straight to the grandmother's bed and devoured her. Then he put on her clothes, dressed himself in her cap, laid himself in bed, and drew the curtains. Little Red Cap, however, had been running about picking flowers, and when she had gathered so many that she could carry no more, she remembered her grandmother and set out on the way to her. She was surprised to find the cottage door standing open, and when she went into the room, she had such a strange feeling that she had said to herself,
"Oh dear, how uneasy I feel today. And at other times I like being with grandmother so much.
She called out,
Good morning.
but received no answer. So she went to the bed and drew back the curtains. There lay her grandmother with her cap pulled far over her face and looking very strange.
Oh, grandmother,
She said,
what big ears you have.
The better to hear you with, my child.
was the reply.
But grandmother, what big eyes you have.
She said,
The better to see you with, my dear.
But grandmother, what large hands you have.
The better to hug you with.
Oh, but grandmother, what a terribly big mouth you have.
The better to eat you with.
and scarcely had the wolf said this, than with one bound he was out of bed and swallowed up Redcap. When the wolf had appeased his appetite, he lay down again in bed, fell asleep, and began to snore very loud. The huntsman was just passing the house and thought to himself,
How the old woman is snoring! I must just see if she wants anything.
So he went into the room, and when he came to the bed, he saw that the wolf was lying in it.
Do I find you here, you old sinner?
Said he.
I have long sought you!
Then, just as he was going to fire at him, it occurred to him that the wolf might have devoured the grandmother, and that she might still be saved. So he did not fire, but took a pair of scissors and began to cut open the stomach of the sleeping wolf. When he made 2 snips, he saw the little red cap shining, and then he made 2 snips more, and the little girl sprang out, crying.
How frightened I have been, how dark it was inside the wolf.
And after that, the aged grandmother came out alive also, but scarcely able to breathe. Redcap, however, quickly fetched great stones with which they filled the wolf's belly, and when he awoke, he wanted to run away, but the stones were so heavy that he collapsed at once and fell dead. Then all 3 were delighted. The huntsman drew off the wolf's skin and went home with it. The grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine with which Redcap had brought, and revived. But Redcap thought to herself,
As long as I live, I will never by myself leave the path, to run into the wood when my mother has forbidden me to do so.
It also related that once, when Redcap was again taking cakes to the old grandmother, another wolf spoke to her and tried to entice her from the path. Redcap, however, was on her guard and went straight forward on her way and told her grandmother that she had met the wolf and that he had said,
Good morning.
to her, but with such a wicked look on his face that if she had not been on the public road, she was certain he would have eaten her up.
Well,
Said the grandmother.
we will shut the door that he may not come in.
Soon afterwards, the wolf knocked and cried,
Open the door, grandmother. I am Little Red Cap, and am bringing you some cakes.
But they did not speak or open the door, so the gray beard stole twice or thrice around the house, and then at last jumped on the roof, intending to wait until Little Red Cap went home in the evening, and then to steal after her and devour her in the darkness. But the grandmother saw what was in his thoughts. In front of the house was a great stone trough, so she said to the child,
Take the pail, Redcap. I made some sausages yesterday, so carry the water in which I boiled them to the trough.
Redcap carried until the great trough was quite full. Then the smell of the sausages reached the wolf, and he sniffed and peeped down, and at last stretched out his neck so far he could no longer keep his footing, and began to slip, and slipped down from the roof straight into the great trough, and was drowned. But Redcap went joyously home, and no one ever did anything to harm her again.
The Juniper Tree. Long, long ago, some 2,000 years or so, there lived a rich man with a good and beautiful wife. They loved each other dearly, but sorrowed much that they had no children. So greatly did they desire to have one, that the wife prayed for it day and night. But still they remained childless. In front of the house there was a court, in which grew a juniper tree. One winter's day, the wife stood under the tree to peel some apples, and as she was peeling them, she cut her finger and blood fell on the snow. Sighed the woman heavily.
If I had but a child, as red as blood and as white as snow.
And as she spoke the words, her heart grew light within her, and it seemed to her that her wish was granted, and she returned to the house feeling glad and comforted. A month passed, and the snow had all disappeared. Then another month went by, and all the earth was green. So the months followed one another, and first the trees budded in the woods, and soon the green branches grew thickly intertwined, and then the blossoms began to fall. Once again, the wife stood under the juniper tree, and it was so full of sweet scent that her heart leaped for joy, and she was so overcome with happiness that she fell to her knees. Presently, the fruit became round and firm, and she was glad and at peace. But when they were fully ripe, she picked the berries and ate eagerly of them, and then she grew sad and ill. A little while later, she called her husband and said to him, weeping,
If I die, bury me under the juniper tree.
Then she felt comforted and happy again, and before another month had passed, she had a little child. And when she saw that it was as white as snow and as red as blood, her joy was so great that she died. Her husband buried her under the juniper tree, and wept bitterly for her. By degrees, however, his sorrow grew less, and although at times he still grieved over his loss, he was able to go about as usual, and later on he married again. He now had a little daughter born to him. The child of his wife was a boy, who was as red as blood and as white as snow. The mother loved her daughter very much, and when she looked at her and then looked at the boy, it pierced her heart to think that he would always stand in the way of her own child, and she was continually thinking how she could get the whole of the property for her. This evil thought took possession of her more and more, and made her behave very unkindly to the boy. She drove him from place to place with cuffings and buffetings, so that the poor child went about in fear and had no peace from the time he left school to the time he went back. One day, the little daughter came running to her mother in the storeroom and said,
Mother, give me an apple.
Yes, my child,
said the wife, and she gave her a beautiful apple out of the chest. The chest had a very heavy lid and a large iron lock.
Mother,
said the daughter again.
May not brother have one too?
The mother was angry at this, but she answered,
yes, when he comes out of school.
Just then she looked at the window and saw him coming, and it seemed as if an evil spirit entered into her, for she snatched the apple out of her little daughter's hand and said,
You shall not have one before your brother.
She threw the apple into the chest and shut it to. The little boy now came in, and the evil spirit in the wife made her say kindly to him,
My son, will you have an apple?
But she gave him a wicked look.
Mother,
said the boy.
how dreadful you look. Yes, give me an apple.
The thought came to her that she would kill him.
Come with me.
She said. She lifted up the lid of the chest,
Take one out for yourself.
and as he bent over to do so, the evil spirit urged her, and crash! Down went the lid, and off went the little boy's head. Then she was overwhelmed with fear at the thought of what she had done.
If only I could prevent anyone knowing that I did it.
She thought. So she went upstairs to her room and took a white handkerchief out of her top drawer. Then she set the boy's head again on his shoulders and bound it with the handkerchief so that nothing could be seen, and placed him on a chair by the door with an apple in his hand. Soon after this, little Marlene came up to her mother, who was stirring a pot of boiling water over the fire, and said,
Mother, brother's sitting by the door with an apple in his hand, and he looked so pale. And when I asked him to give me the apple, he did not answer, and that frightened me.
Go to him again.
Said her mother.
And if he does not answer, give him a box on the ear.
So little Marlene went and said,
Brother, give me that apple.
but he did not say a word. Then she gave him a box on the ear, and his head rolled off. She was so terrified at this that she ran crying and screaming to her mother.
Oh,
She said,
I've knocked off brother's head.
and then she wept, and nothing would stop her.
What have you done?
Said her mother.
But no one must know about it, so you must keep silence. What is done cannot be undone. We will make him into puddings.
And then she took the little boy and cut him up, made him into puddings, and put him in the pot. But Marlene stood looking on, and wept, and her tears fell into the pot, so that there was no need of salt. Presently the father came home and sat down to his dinner. He asked,
Where is my son?
The mother said nothing, but gave him a large dish of black pudding, and Marlene still wept without ceasing. The father again asked,
Where is my son?
Oh,
answered the wife.
he has gone into the country to his mother's great uncle. He is going to stay there sometime.
What has he gone there for? And he never even said goodbye to me.
Well, he likes being there, and he told me he should be away quite 6 weeks. He is well looked after there.
I feel very unhappy about it.
Said the husband.
In case it should not be alright, and he ought to have said goodbye to me.
With this, he went on with his dinner, and said,
Little Marlene, why do you weep? Brother will soon be back.
Then he asked his wife for more pudding, and as he ate, he threw the bones under the table. Little Marlene went upstairs and took her best silk handkerchief out of her bottom drawer, and in it she wrapped all the bones from under the table and carried them outside, and all the time she did nothing but weep. Then she laid them in the green grass under the juniper tree, and she had no sooner done so than all her sadness seemed to leave her, and she wept no more. And now the juniper tree began to move, and the branches waved backwards and forwards, first away from one another and then together again, as it might be someone clapping their hands for joy. After this, a mist came around the tree, and in the midst of it there was a burning as of fire, and out of the fire there flew a beautiful bird, that rose high into the air, singing magnificently. And when it could no more be seen, the juniper tree stood there as before, and the silk handkerchief and the bones were gone. Little Marlene now felt as light-hearted and happy as if her brother were still alive, and she went back to the house and sat down cheerfully to the table and ate. The bird flew away and alighted on the house of a goldsmith and began to sing.
My mother killed her little son. My father grieved when I was gone. My sister loved me best of all. She laid her kerchief over me, and took my bones that they might lie underneath the juniper tree. Kiwi, kiwi, what a beautiful bird am I.
The goldsmith was in his workshop making a gold chain. When he heard the song of the bird on his roof, he thought it so beautiful that he got up and ran out, and as he crossed the threshold he lost one of his slippers. But he ran out in the middle of the street, with a slipper on one foot and a sock on the other. He still had on his apron, and still held the gold chain and the pincers in his hands. And so he stood gazing up at the bird, while the sun came shining brightly down on the street.
Bird,
he said,
how beautifully you sing. Sing me that song again.
Nay,
said to the bird,
I do not sing twice for nothing. Give that gold chain, and I will sing it you again.
Here is the chain. Take it.
said the goldsmith.
Only sing me that again.
The bird flew down and took the gold chain in his right claw, and then he alighted again in front of the goldsmith and sang.
My mother killed her little son. My father grieved when I was gone. My sister loved me best of all. She laid her kerchief over me, and took my bones that they might lie underneath the juniper tree. Kiwi, kiwi, what a beautiful bird am I.
Then he flew away and settled on the roof of a shoemaker's house and sang.
My mother killed her little son. My father grieved when I was gone. My sister loved me best of all. She laid her kerchief over me, and took my bones that they might lie underneath the juniper tree. Kiwi, kiwi, what a beautiful bird am I.
The shoemaker heard him, and he jumped up and ran out in his shirt sleeves, and stood looking up at the bird on the roof, with his hand over his eyes to keep himself from being blinded by the sun.
How lovely you sing,
he said. Then he called through the door to his wife. Then he called his daughter and the children, then the apprentices, girls and boys, and they all ran up the street to look at the bird, and saw how splendid it was with its red and green feathers, and its neck like burnished gold, and eyes like two bright stars in its head.
Sing me that song again,
said the shoemaker.
Nay,
answered the bird.
I do not sing twice for nothing. You must give me something.
The wife went in and fetched the shoes.
Sing me that song again,
said the shoemaker. The bird flew down and took the red shoes in his left claw, and then he went back to the roof and sang.
My mother killed her little son. My father grieved when I was gone. My sister loved me best of all. She laid her kerchief over me, and took my bones that they might lie underneath the juniper tree. Kiwi, kiwi, what a beautiful bird am I.
When she had finished, she flew away. He had the chain in his right claw and the shoes in his left, and he flew right away to a mill, and the mill went click, clack, click, clack, click, clack. Inside the mill were 20 of the miller's men, hewing a stone as they went.
Hick hack, hick hack, hick hack.
The mill went click, clack, click, clack, click, clack. The bird settled on a lime tree in front of the mill and sang.
My mother killed her little son.
Then one of the men left off.
My father grieved when I was gone.
2 more men left off and listened.
My sister loved me best of all.
Then 4 more left off.
She laid her kerchief over me, and took my bones that they might lie.
Now there were only 8 at work.
Underneath.
And now only 5.
The juniper tree.
And now only 1.
Kiwi, kiwi, what a beautiful bird am I.
Then he looked up, and the last one had left off work.
Bird,
he said.
What a beautiful song that is you sing. Let me hear it too. Sing it again.
Nay,
answered the bird.
I do not sing twice for nothing. Give me that millstone, and I will sing it again.
If it belonged to me alone,
said the man,
you should have it. Yes, yes,
said the others.
If she will sing again, she can have it.
The bird came down, and all the 20 millers set to and lifted up the stone with a beam. Then the bird put its head through the hole, and took the stone round his neck like a collar, and flew back with it to the tree and sang.
My mother killed her little son. My father grieved when I was gone. My sister loved me best of all. She laid her kerchief over me, and took my bones that they might lie underneath the juniper tree. Kiwi, kiwi, what a beautiful bird am I.
And when he had finished his song, he spread his wings, and with the chain in his right claw, the shoes in his left, and the millstone round his neck, he flew right away to his father's house. The father, the mother, and little Marlene were having their dinner.
How light-hearted I feel,
said the father.
So pleased and cheerful.
And
said the mother.
I feel so uneasy, as if a heavy thunderstorm were coming.
But little Marlene sat and wept and wept. Then the bird came flying towards the house and settled on the roof.
I do feel so happy,
said the father.
And how beautifully the sun shines. I feel just as if I were going to see an old friend again.
said the wife.
I'm so full of distress and uneasiness that my teeth chatter, and I feel as if there were a fire in my veins.
And she tore open her dress, and all the while little Marlene sat in the corner and wept, and the plate on her knees was wet with her tears. The bird now flew to the juniper tree and began singing.
My mother killed her little son.
The mother shut her eyes and her ears, that she might see and hear nothing. But there was a roaring sound in her ears like that of a violent storm, and in her eyes a burning and flashing like lightning.
My father grieved when I was gone.
Look, mother,
said the man,
at the beautiful bird that is singing so magnificently, and how warm and bright the sun is, and what a delicious scent of spice in the air.
My sister loved me best of all.
Then little Marlene laid her head down on her knees and sobbed.
I must go outside and see the bird nearer,
said the man.
Dad, do not go,
cried the wife.
I feel as if the whole house were in flames.
But the man went out and looked at the bird.
She laid her kerchief over me, and took my bones that they might lie underneath the juniper tree. Kiwi, kiwi, what a beautiful bird am I.
With that, the bird let fall the gold chain, and it fell just around the man's neck, so that it fitted him exactly. He went inside and said,
See, what a splendid bird that is. He has given me this beautiful gold chain, and looks so beautiful himself.
But the wife was in such fear and trouble that she fell on the floor, and her cap fell from her head. Then the bird began again.
My mother killed her little son.
Oh, me,
cried the wife.
If I were but 1,000 feet beneath the earth, that I might not hear that song.
My father grieved when I was gone.
Then the woman fell down again as if dead.
My sister loved me best of all.
Well, I'll go out too and see if the bird will give me anything,
said little Marlene. So she went out.
She laid her kerchief over me, and took my bones that they might lie.
And he threw down the shoes to her.
Underneath the juniper tree. Kiwi, kiwi, what a beautiful bird am I.
And she now felt quite happy and light-hearted. She put on the shoes and danced and jumped about in them.
I was so miserable,
she said,
when I came out, but that has all passed away. That is indeed a splendid bird, and he has given me a pair of red shoes.
The wife sprang up, with her hair standing out from her head like flames of fire.
Then I will go out too,
she said,
and see if it will lighten my misery, for I feel as if the world were coming to an end.
But as she crossed the threshold, crash! The bird threw the millstone down on her head, and she was crushed to death. The father and little Marlene heard the sound and ran out, but they only saw mist and flame and fire rising from the spot, and when these had passed, there stood the little brother, and he took the father and little Marlene by the hand. Then they all three rejoiced, and they went inside together and sat down to their dinners and ate. The end.
Rapunzel by the Brothers Grimm. There were once a man and a woman who had long in vain wished for a child. At length, the woman hoped that God was about to grant her desire. These people had a little window at the back of their house, from which a splendid garden could be seen, which was full of the most beautiful flowers and herbs. It was, however, surrounded by a high wall, and no one dared to go into it, because it belonged to an enchantress who had great power and was dreaded by all the world. One day, the woman was standing by this window and looking down into the garden, when she saw the bed, which was planted with the most beautiful rampion, and it looked so fresh and green that she longed for it. She quite pined away, and began to look pale and miserable. Then her husband was alarmed and asked,
"What ails you, dear wife?"
She replied,
If I can't eat some of the rampion which is in the garden behind our house, I shall die.
The man, who loved her, thought,
Sooner than let your wife die, bring her some of the rampion yourself. Let it cost what it will.
At twilight, he clambered down over the wall into the garden of the enchantress, hastily clutched a handful of rampion and took it to his wife. She at once made herself a salad of it and ate it greedily. It tasted so good to her, so very good, that the next day she longed for it 3 times as much as before. If he was to have any rest, her husband must once more descend into the garden. In the gloom of evening, therefore, he let himself down again, but when he had clambered down the wall, he was terribly afraid, for he saw the enchantress standing before him.
"How can you dare?"
said she with angry look.
"Descend into my garden and steal my rampion like a thief. You shall suffer for it."
Answered he.
Let mercy take the place of justice. I only made up my mind to do it out of necessity. My wife saw your rampion from the window and felt such a longing for it that she would have died if she had not got some to eat.
Then the enchantress allowed her anger to be softened and said to him,
"If the case be as you say, I will allow you to take away with you as much rampion as you will. Only I make one condition. You must give me the child which your wife will bring into the world. It shall be well treated, and I will care for it like a mother."
The man, in his terror, consented to everything, and when the woman was brought to bed, the enchantress appeared at once, gave the child the name of Rapunzel, and took it away with her. Rapunzel grew into the most beautiful child under the sun. When she was 12 years old, the enchantress shut her into a tower, which lay in a forest, and had neither stairs nor door, but quite at the top was a little window. When the enchantress wanted to go in, she placed herself beneath it and cried,
"Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me."
Rapunzel had magnificent long hair, fine as spun gold, and when she heard the voice of the enchantress, she unfastened her braided tresses, wound them round one of the hook of the window above, and then the hair fell 20 ells down, and the enchantress climbed up by it. After a year or two, it came to pass that the king's son rode through the forest and passed by the tower. Then he heard a song, which was so charming that he stood still and listened. This was Rapunzel, who, in her solitude, passed her time in letting her sweet voice resound. The king's son wanted to climb up to her, and looked for the door of the tower, but none was to be found. He rode home, but the singing had so deeply touched his heart that every day he went out into the forest and listened to it. Once, when he was thus standing behind a tree, he saw that an enchantress came there, and he heard how she cried,
"Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me."
Then Rapunzel let down the braids of her hair, and the enchantress climbed up to her.
If that is the ladder by which one mounts, I too will try my fortune,
said he. And the next day, when it began to grow dark, he went to the tower and cried,
Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let your hair down to me.
Immediately the hair fell down, and the king's son climbed up. At first, Rapunzel was terribly frightened when a man, such as her eyes had never yet beheld, came to her. But the king's son began to talk to her quite like a friend, and told her that his heart had been so stirred that it had let him have no rest, and he had been forced to see her. Then Rapunzel lost her fear, and when he asked her if she would take him for her husband, and she saw that he was young and handsome, she thought,
He will love me more than old Dame Gothel does.
And she said yes, and laid her hand in his. She said,
I will willingly go away with you, but I do not know how to get down. Bring with you a skein of silk every time that you come, and I will weave a ladder with it. And when that is ready, I will descend, and you will take me on your horse.
They agreed that until that time he would come to her every evening, for the old woman came by day. The enchantress remarked nothing of this, until once Rapunzel said to her,
Tell me, Dame Gothel, how it happens that you're so much heavier for me to draw up than the young king's son. He is with me in a moment.
Ah, you wicked child!
cried the enchantress.
What do I hear you say? I thought I had separated you from the world, and yet you have deceived me!
In her anger, she clutches Rapunzel's beautiful tresses, wrapped them twice round her left hand, seized a pair of scissors with the right, and snip, snap, they were cut off, and the lovely braid lay on the ground. And she was so pitiless that she took poor Rapunzel into a desert, where she had to live in great grief and misery. On the same day that she cast out Rapunzel, however, the enchantress fastened the braid of hair which she had cut off to the hook of the window, and when the king's son came and cried,
Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let your hair down to me,
she let the hair down. The king's son ascended, but instead of finding his dearest Rapunzel, he found the enchantress, who gazed at him with wicked and venomous looks.
Aha!
She cried mockingly.
You would fetch your dearest, but the beautiful bird sits no longer singing in its nest. The cat has got it, and will scratch out your eyes as well. Rapunzel is lost to you. You will never see her again.
The king's son was beside himself with pain, and in his despair he leapt down from the tower. He escaped with his life, but the thorn into which he fell pierced his eyes. Then he wandered quite blind about the forest, ate nothing but roots and berries, and did not but lament and weep over the loss of his dearest wife. Thus he roamed about in misery for some years, and at the length came to the desert where Rapunzel, with the twins to which she had given birth, a boy and a girl, lived in wretchedness. He heard a voice, and it seemed so familiar to him that he went toward it, and when he approached, Rapunzel knew him, and fell on his neck and wept. 2 of her tears wetted his eyes, and they grew clear again, and he could see with them as before. He led her to his kingdom, where he was joyfully received, and they lived for a long time afterwards, happy and content.
The Robber Bridegroom by the Brothers Grimm. There was once a miller who had one beautiful daughter, and as she was grown up, he was anxious that she should be well married and provided for. He said to himself,
I will give her to the first suitable man who comes and asks for her hand."
Not long after, a suitor appeared, and as he appeared to be very rich, and the miller could see nothing in him with which to find fault, he betrothed his daughter to him. But the girl did not care for the man as a girl ought to care for her betrothed husband. She did not feel that she could trust him, and she could not look at him nor think of him without an inward shudder. She tried to excuse herself by saying that she would not be able to find the way thither. When Sunday came and it was time for the girl to start, a feeling of dread came over her which she could not explain, and that she might be able to find her path again, she filled her pockets with peas and lentils to sprinkle on the ground as she went along. On reaching the entrance to the forest, she found the path strewed with ashes, and these she followed, throwing down some peas on either side of her at every step she took. She walked the whole day until she came to the deepest, darkest part of the forest. There she saw a lonely house, looking so grim and mysterious that it did not please her at all. She stepped inside, but not a soul was to be seen, and a great silence reigned throughout. Suddenly, a voice cried,
"Turn back, young maiden fair, linger not in this murderous lair."
The girl looked up and saw that the voice came from a bird hanging in a cage on the wall. Again it cried,
Turn back, young maiden fair, linger not in this murderous lair."
The girl passed on, going from room to room of the house, but they were all empty, and still she saw no one. At last she came to the cellar, and there sat a very, very old woman who could not keep her head from shaking.
"Can you tell me,"
asked the girl,
"if my betrothed husband lives here?"
"Ah, you poor child,"
answered the old woman.
"what a place for you to come to. This is the murderer's den. You think yourself a promised bride and that your marriage will soon take place. But it is with death that you will keep your marriage feast. Look, do you see that large cauldron of water which I am obliged to keep on the fire? As soon as they have you in their power, they will kill you without mercy. They will cook and eat you, for they are the eaters of men. If I did not take pity on you and save you, you would be lost."
Thereupon the old woman led her behind a large cask which quite hid her from view.
"Keep as still as a mouse," she said. "Do not move or speak, or it will all be over for you. Tonight, when the robbers are asleep, we will flee together. I have long been waiting for an opportunity to escape."
The words were hardly out of her mouth when the godless crew returned, dragging another young girl along with them. They were all drunk and paid no heed to her cries and lamentations. They gave her wine to drink, 3 glasses full, one of white wine, one of red, and one of yellow, and with that her heart gave way and she died. Then they tore off her dainty clothing, laid her on a table, and cut her beautiful body into pieces, and sprinkled salt upon it. The poor betrothed girl crouched trembling and shuddering behind the cask, for she saw what a terrible fate had been intended for her by the robbers. One of them now noticed a gold ring still remaining on the little finger of the murdered girl, and as he could not draw it off easily, he took a hatchet and cut off the finger. But the finger sprang into the air and fell behind the cask into the lap of the girl that was hiding there. The robber took a light and began looking for it, but he could not find it.
Have you looked behind the large cask?
Said one of the others. But the old woman called out,
Come and eat your suppers. Let the thing be till tomorrow. The finger won't run away.
The old woman is right,
said the robbers, and they ceased looking for the finger and sat down. The old woman then mixed a sleeping draught with their wine, and before long they were all lying on the floor of the cellar, fast asleep and snoring. As soon as the girl was assured of this, she came from behind the cask. She was obliged to step over the bodies of the sleepers, who were lying close together, and every moment she was filled with renewed dread lest she should awaken them. But God helped her, so that she passed safely over them, and then she and the old woman went upstairs, opened the door, and hastened as fast as they could from the murderer's den. They found the ashes scattered by the wind, but the peas and lentils had sprouted and grown sufficiently above the ground to guide them in the moonlight along the path. All night long they walked, and it was morning before they reached the mill. Then the girl told her father all that had happened. The day came that had been fixed for the marriage. The bridegroom arrived, and also a large company of guests, for the miller had taken care to invite all his friends and relations. As they sat at the feast, each guest in turn was asked to tell a tale. The bride sat still and did not say a word.
And you, my love?
Said the bridegroom, turning to her.
Is there no tale you know? Tell us something.
I will tell you a dream then,
said the bride.
I went alone through a forest, came at last to a house. Not a soul could I find within, but a bird that was hanging in a cage on the wall cried,
turn back, young maiden fair, linger not in this murderous lair.
And again, a second time, it said these words,
my darling, this is only a dream.
I went on through the house from room to room, but they were all empty, and everything was so grim and mysterious. At last I went down to the cellar, and there sat a very, very old woman, who could not keep her head still. I asked her if my betrothed lived here, and she answered,
Ah, you poor child. As soon as they have you in their power, they will kill you without mercy. They will cook and eat you.
My darling, this is only a dream.
The old woman hid me behind a large cask, and scarcely had she done this when the robbers returned home, dragging a young girl along with them. They gave her 3 kinds of wine to drink, white, red, and yellow, and with that she died.
My darling, this is only a dream.
Then they tore off her dainty clothing and cut her beautiful body into pieces and sprinkled salt upon it.
My darling, this is only a dream.
And one of the robbers saw that there was a gold ring still left on her finger, and as it was difficult to draw off, he took a hatchet and cut off her finger. But the finger sprang into the air and fell behind the great cask into my lap. And here is the finger with the ring!
And with these words the bride drew forth the finger and showed it to the assembled guests. The bridegroom, who during this recital had grown deadly pale, up and tried to escape, but the guests seized him and held him fast. They delivered him up to justice, and he and all of his murderous band were condemned to death for their wicked deeds.
Hard by a great forest dwelt a poor woodcutter with his wife and his 2 children. The boy was called Hansel, and the girl Gretel. He had little to bite and to break, and once, when great dearth fell on the land, he could no longer procure even daily bread. Now, when he thought over this by night in his bed, and tossed about in his anxiety, he groaned and said to his wife,
What is to become of us? How are we to feed our poor children when we no longer have anything, even for ourselves.
I'll tell you what, husband.
answered the woman.
Early tomorrow morning, we will take the children out into the forest to where it is the thickest. There, we will light a fire for them and give each of them one more piece of bread. And then we will go to our work and leave them alone. They will not find the way home again, and we shall be rid of them.
No, wife,
said the man.
I will not do that. How can I bear to leave my children alone in the forest?
Oh, you fool,
said she.
Then we must all four die of hunger. You may as well plane the planks for our coffins.
And she left him no peace until he consented.
But I feel very sorry for the poor children, all the same,
said the man. The two children had also not been able to sleep for hunger, and had heard what their stepmother had said to their father. Gretel wept bitter tears and said to Hansel,
Now all is over with us.
Be quiet, Gretel,
said Hansel.
Do not distress yourself. I will soon find a way to help us.
And when the old folk had fallen asleep, he had got up, put on his little coat, opened the door below, and crept outside. The moon shone brightly, and the white pebbles which lay in front of the house glittered like real silver pennies. Hansel stopped and stuffed the little pocket of his coat with as many as he could get in. Then he went back and said to Gretel,
Be comforted, dear little sister, and sleep in peace. God will not forsake us.
And he lay down again in his bed. When day dawned, but before the sun had risen, the woman came and awoke the two children, saying,
Get up, you sluggards. We are going into the forest to fetch wood.
She gave each a little piece of bread and said,
There is something for your dinner, but do not eat it up before then, for you will get nothing else.
Gretel took the bread under her apron, as Hansel had the pebbles in his pocket. Then they all set out together on the way to the forest. When they had walked a short time, Hansel stood still and peeped back at the house, and did so again and again. His father said,
Hansel, what are you looking at there to stay behind for? Pay attention, and do not forget how to use your legs.
Ah, father,
said Hansel.
I am looking at my little white cat, which is sitting up on the roof and wants to say goodbye to me.
The wife said,
Fool, that is not your little cat. That is the morning sun, which is shining on the chimneys.
Hansel, however, had not been looking back at the cat, but had been constantly throwing one of the white pebble stones out of his pocket on the road. When they had reached the middle of the forest, the father said,
Now, children, pile up some wood, and I will light a fire that you may not be cold.
Hansel and Gretel gathered brushwood together, as high as a little hill. The brushwood was lighted, and when the flames were burning very high, the woman said,
Now, children, lay yourselves down by the fire and rest. We will go into the forest and cut some wood. When we have done, we will come back and fetch you away.
Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire, and when noon came, each ate a little piece of bread, and as they heard the strokes of the wood axe, they believed that their father was near. It was not the axe, however, but a branch which he had fastened to a withered tree, which the wind was blowing backwards and forwards. As they had been sitting such a long time, their eyes closed with fatigue, and they fell fast asleep. When at last they awoke, it was already dark night. Gretel began to cry and said,
How are we to get out of the forest now?
But Hansel comforted her and said,
Just wait a little until the moon has risen, and then we will soon find the way.
When the full moon had risen, Hansel took his little sister by the hand and followed the pebbles which shone like newly coined silver pieces and showed them the way. They walked the whole night long, and by break of day came once more to their father's house. They knocked at the door, and when the woman opened it and saw that it was Hansel and Gretel, she said,
You naughty children, why have you slept so long in the forest? We thought you were never coming back at all.
Father, however, rejoiced, for it had cut him to the heart to leave them behind alone. Not long afterwards, there was once more great dearth throughout the land, and the children heard their mother saying at night to their father,
Everything is eaten again. We have 1 half loaf left, and that is the end. The children must go. We will take them farther into the wood, so that they will not find their way out again. There is no other means of saving ourselves.
The man's heart was heavy, and he thought,
It would be better for you to share the last mouthful with your children.
The woman, however, would listen to nothing that he had to say, but scolded and reproached him. He who says A must say B likewise, and as he had yielded the first time, he had to do so a second time also. The children, however, were still awake and had heard the conversation. When the old folks were asleep, Hansel again got up, and wanted to go out and pick up pebbles as he had done before. But the woman had locked the door, and Hansel could not get out. Nevertheless, he comforted his little sister and said,
Do not cry, Gretel. Go to sleep quietly. The good God will help us.
Early in the morning came the woman, and took the children out of their beds. Their piece of bread was given to them, but it was still smaller than the time before. On the way into the forest, Hansel crumbled his in his pocket, and often stood still and threw a morsel on the ground.
Hansel, why do you stop and look around?
Said the father.
Go on.
I am looking back at my little pigeon, which is sitting on the roof and wants to say goodbye to me.
Answered Hansel.
Fool,
said the woman.
that is not your little pigeon. That is the morning sun that is shining on the chimney.
Hansel, however, little by little, threw all the crumbs on the path. The woman led the children still deeper into the forest, where they had never in their lives been before. Then a great fire was again made. The mother said,
Just sit there, you children, and when you are tired, you may sleep a little. We are going into the forest to cut wood, and in the evening, when we are done, we will come and fetch you away.
When it was noon, Gretel shared her piece of bread with Hansel, who had scattered his by the way. Then they fell asleep and evening passed, but no one came to the poor children. They did not awake until it was dark night, and Hansel comforted his little sister and said,
Just wait, Gretel, until the moon rises, and then we shall see the crumbs of bread which I have strewn about. They will show us our way home again.
When the moon came, they set out, but they found no crumbs, for the many thousands of birds which fly about in the woods and fields had picked them all up. Hansel said to Gretel,
We shall soon find the way.
But they did not find it. They walked the whole night and all the next day, from morning till evening, but they did not get out of the forest, and were very hungry, for they had nothing to eat but 2 or 3 berries which grew on the ground. And as they were so weary that their legs would carry them no longer, they lay down beneath a tree and fell asleep. It was now 3 mornings since they had left their father's house. They began to walk again, but they always came deeper into the forest, and if help did not come soon, they must die of hunger and weariness. When it was midday, they saw a beautiful snow-white bird sitting on a bough, which sang so delightfully that they stood still and listened to it. And when its song was over, it spread its wings and flew away before them, and they followed it until they reached a little house, on the roof of which it alighted. And when they approached the little house, they saw that it was built of bread and covered with cakes, but that the windows were of clear sugar.
We will set to work on that,
said Hansel,
and have a good meal. I will eat a bit of the roof, and you, Gretel, can eat some of the window. It will taste sweet.
Hansel reached up above and broke off a little of the roof to try how it tasted. Gretel leaned against the window and nibbled at the panes. Then a soft voice cried from the parlor,
"Nibble, nibble, gnaw. Who is nibbling at my little house?"
The children answered,
The wind, the heaven-born wind.
And went on eating without disturbing themselves. Hansel, who liked the taste of the roof, tore down a great piece of it. Gretel pushed out the whole of one round window pane, sat down and enjoyed herself with it. Suddenly the door opened. A woman as old as the hills, who supported herself on crutches, came creeping out. Hansel and Gretel were so terribly frightened that they let fall what they had in their hands. The old woman, however, nodded her head and said,
"Oh, you dear children, who has brought you here? Do come in and stay with me. No harm shall happen to you."
She took them both by the hand and led them into her little house. Then good food was set before them, milk and pancakes, with sugar, apples, and nuts. Afterwards, 2 pretty little beds were covered with clean white linen. Hansel and Gretel lay down in them, and thought they were in heaven. The old woman had only pretended to be so kind. She was in reality a wicked witch, who lay in wait for children and had only built the little house of bread in order to entice them there. When a child fell into her power, she killed it, cooked it, and ate it, and that was a feast day with her. Witches have red eyes and cannot see far, but they have a keen scent like the beasts, and are aware when human beings draw near. When Hansel and Gretel came into her neighborhood, she laughed with malice, and said mockingly,
"I have them. They shall not escape me again."
Early in the morning, before the children were awake, she was already up, and when she saw both of them sleeping and looking so pretty, with their plump and rosy cheeks, she muttered to herself,
"That will be a dainty mouthful."
Then she seized Hansel with her shriveled hand, carried him into a little stable, and locked him in behind a grated door. Scream as he might, it would not help him. Then she went to Gretel, shook her till she awoke, and cried,
"Get up, lazy thing. Fetch some water, and cook something good for your brother. He is in the stable outside, and is to be made fat. When he is fat, I will eat him."
Gretel began to weep bitterly, but it was all in vain, for she was forced to do what the wicked witch commanded. And now the best food was cooked for poor Hansel, but Gretel got nothing but crab shells. Every morning the woman crept into the little stable and cried,
"Hansel, stretch out your finger, that I may feel if you will soon be fat."
Hansel, however, stretched out a little bone to her. The old woman, who had dim eyes, could not see it, and thought it was Hansel's finger, and was astonished that there was no way of fattening him. When 4 weeks had gone by, and Hansel still remained thin, she was seized with impatience and would not wait any longer.
"Now then, Gretel,"
she cried to the girl,
"stir yourself and bring some water.
Let Hansel be fat or lean. Tomorrow I will kill him and cook him.
Ah, how the poor little sister did lament when she had to fetch the water, and how her tears did flow down her cheeks.
Dear God, do help us.
She cried,
If the wild beasts in the forest had but devoured us, we should at any rate have died together.
Just keep your noise to yourself,
said the old woman.
It won't help you at all.
Early in the morning, Gretel had to go out and hang up the cauldron with the water and light the fire.
We will bake first,
said the old woman.
I have already heated the oven and kneaded the dough.
She pushed poor Gretel out to the oven, from which flames of fire were already darting.
Creep in,
said the witch,
and see if it is properly heated so that we can put the bread in.
And once Gretel was inside, she intended to shut the oven and let her bake in it, and then she would eat her too. But Gretel saw what she had in mind and said,
I do not know how I am to do it. How do I get in?
Silly goose,
said the old woman.
The door is big enough. Just look, I can get in myself.
And she crept up and thrust her head into the oven. Then Gretel gave her a push that drove her far into it, and shut the iron door, and fastened the bolt. Oh, then she began to howl quite horribly. But Gretel ran away, and the godless witch was miserably burnt to death. Gretel, however, ran like lightning to Hansel, opened his little stable, and cried,
Hansel, we are saved! The old witch is dead!
Then Hansel sprang like a bird from its cage when the door is opened. How they did rejoice and embrace each other, and dance about and kiss each other. And as they had no longer any need to fear her, they went into the witch's house, and in every corner there stood chests full of pearls and jewels.
These are far better than pebbles,
said Hansel, and thrust into his pockets whatever could be got in. And Gretel said,
I too will take something home with me.
And filled her pinafore full.
But now we must be off,
said Hansel,
that we may be out of the witch's forest.
When they had walked for 2 hours, they came to a great stretch of water.
We cannot cross,
said Hansel.
I see no foot plank, and no bridge.
And there's no ferry,
answered Gretel.
But a white duck is swimming there. If I ask her, she will help us over.
Then she cried,
little duck, dost thou see? Hansel and Gretel are waiting for thee. There's never a plank or bridge in sight. Take us across on thy back so white.
The duck came to them, and Hansel seated himself on its back, told his sister to sit by him.
No,
replied Gretel.
That will be too heavy for the little duck. She will take us across, one after the other.
The good little duck did so, and when they were once safely across and had walked for a short time, the forest seemed to be more and more familiar to them, and at length they saw from afar their father's house. Then they began to run, rushed into the parlor, and threw themselves round their father's neck. The man had not known one happy hour since he had left the children in the forest. The woman, however, was dead. Gretel emptied her pinafore until pearls and precious stones ran about the room. Hansel threw one handful after another out of his pocket to add to them. Then all anxiety was at an end, and they lived together in perfect happiness. My tale is done, there runs a mouse. Whosoever catches it may make himself a big fur cap out of it.